What if I told you that one of the absolute strangest, most dramatic stories in the Gospels is actually a masterclass in ancient storytelling? Today, we're not just going to retell the story of the Gerasene demoniac. No, we're going to break it down using the tools of literary analysis to really understand what's going on under the surface of this ancient text.
This is not your average Sunday school story. It reads like a supernatural thriller. You've got a man so tormented by some unseen force that no chains can hold him, an entire army of demons speaking with one voice, and this bizarre, chaotic climax involving a stampede of pigs. This whole thing is designed to be unsettling.
So let's just set the scene. The story kicks off with this guy, right? An outcast, living among the dead. The text says he shatters chains and fetters with this inhuman strength, a wild force that nobody can tame. He's just a figure of pure, raw torment, crying out day and night. It's a picture of complete and utter desperation.
Now, when Jesus confronts whatever is possessing this man, he asks for its name, and the answer is just chilling: legion. You have to remember, for a first-century audience living under Roman occupation, a legion wasn't just a word. It was a military unit of about 6,000 soldiers, a symbol of overwhelming, oppressive power. So just that one word tells you the scale of this problem is immense, like an entire army has occupied one single person.
Then, the demons beg Jesus to send them into a nearby herd of pigs, and the text is super specific here. There were about 2,000 of them. And that's not just some random detail. In that kind of society, a herd this big is a massive financial investment. Plus, the fact that there are pigs tells us we're in non-Jewish territory, since pigs were considered unclean. The author really wants you to feel the weight of what's about to be lost.
So in this thunderous, chaotic wave, the entire herd just stampedes down a cliff, into the water, and drowns. The man is healed, he's back in his right mind, but the economic fallout for the local herdsmen is catastrophic. The story ends not with a big celebration, but with the townspeople asking this miracle worker to please leave. They see his power, and frankly, it terrifies them.
Okay, so we've got a man possessed by an army, a herd of self-destructing pigs, and a terrified town. It's a wild story, full of supernatural stuff and really puzzling details. So that raises a really important question. How do we go from just reading it to actually understanding it? How do we analyze it without just getting lost in all the strangeness?
Well, the first tool we can use is understanding its genre. It's kind of like how you know the difference between a comedy, a thriller, and a documentary. Ancient texts also have genres with their own rules, things like parables or psalms or legal codes. This story fits into a very specific category, the miracle story. Think of it like looking at the blueprint for the story. It shows us how it's built and what it's designed to do.
So what even is a miracle story? Well, it's a story where the miracle itself is the main event. But here's the crucial part. Its purpose isn't just to wow you with something supernatural. The whole story is built to reveal something specific about the character and authority of the person performing the miracle. The miracle is the vehicle, the real message is about the miracle worker.
And this genre usually follows a pretty predictable four-part pattern. First, you get the problem, described in detail, the suffering, the illness, the desperation. Second, there's a request for help, right? A plea for someone to step in. Third, the miracle worker takes action, using their power to fix the problem. And finally, we see the result and the reaction from everyone who saw it. It's a simple but really effective formula for highlighting the power of that central figure.
Okay, so now that we have this four-part framework, let's actually apply it to our story. We're going to lay this structure right over the narrative of the demoniac and see how it fits, and maybe more importantly, see where the story kind of breaks the mold.
And this is where the story's complexity really starts to pop. The problem? It's there. A long, vivid description of the man's suffering. The action and result? Those are clear too. But check out the request part. It's ambiguous. The text says the man ran to Jesus, but we don't know if it was the man looking for help or if it was the demons rushing out to confront a threat. And that ambiguity? That's not an accident. It's a deliberate choice by the author, and it's a key to the story's deeper meaning. In fact, the story is just full of these little puzzles that make a simple reading tricky. Who's the main actor at any given moment? Who really started this whole encounter? And later, who's actually responsible for the pigs stampeding into the lake? The text doesn't just hand you the answer. It forces you to think about these unseen forces at play and the very nature of power itself.
Okay, so if the whole point of a miracle story is to reveal something about the miracle worker, what does this analysis show us?
By breaking down the structure, we can start to see the story's real message, its theological takeaways, if you will. Basically, what is the author trying to tell us about Jesus, about the nature of evil, and about our own human responses to the divine?
All right. First up, what does the story show us about Jesus? Well, he's identified by these spiritual beings as the Son of God, a title with huge theological weight. He shows he has absolute authority over not just one demon, but a legion of them. He shows compassion for a man that society had totally written off. And in this fascinating twist, when the terrified townspeople ask him to leave, he respects their free will and just leaves. It shows a kind of power that doesn't force itself on people.
And this is where you get this really deep irony in the story. The clearest, most direct statement about Jesus' divine identity in this entire story doesn't come from a follower or a disciple. It comes from the demons themselves. They can see a spiritual reality that the humans all around them are totally blind to.
The narrative also gives us a really clear picture of how it sees these demonic forces. They're shown as a real, destructive force, powerful enough to overpower a man and a herd of 2,000 pigs. They recognize spiritual authority when they see it. But for all their terrifying power, they're ultimately subject to a higher authority. They have to ask Jesus for permission before they can do anything.
And what does the story say about us, about people? Well, it's a pretty sharp commentary on human nature. The townspeople seem more worried about their lost pigs, their economic stability, than the incredible freedom of a fellow human being. You know, they choose being comfortable over this world-changing miracle. And yet, the story also shows that the healed man with no special training is empowered to become a witness just by telling his own story of transformation.
So, you might be thinking, what's the point of all this analysis? Why not just read the story and move on? Well, because by understanding the structure, the genre, the literary choices the author made, we can get much closer to the original message and see the story's real, lasting power.
Here's the bottom line. Looking at a story's framework isn't just some dry academic exercise. It's the key that unlocks the layers of meaning baked into the text. It helps us see how the story is actually built to deliver its powerful message about power, fear, and transformation.
So if you remember nothing else, here are 3 big things to take away from this. First, the story says that while chaotic forces might be real, a higher, restorative power is ultimately in control. Second, it's a powerful warning against putting your own material comfort ahead of a transformative encounter with the divine, a choice the townspeople make very clear. And third, it's a reminder that anyone's personal story of change can be a powerful testimony.
And that leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on. The next time you come across a powerful story, whether it's in an ancient text or a modern movie, think about its underlying structure. How is it built? What formula is it following or maybe even breaking? Because once you start asking how a story is told, you move from just being a passive reader to an active interpreter. And honestly, that's where the real adventure of reading begins.